Well, hello, boys and girls, and mums and dads, and everyone else who's watching today. I want to tell you a story, and a couple of stories toward the end. But first of all, story of a father and a mother who many years ago were wanting to have another child. They had two boys, and the mother was wanting a girl, and she waited expectantly, wondering what was going to happen. And this is her baby. And is it a girl or a boy? What do you think? It's dressed in a little dress. I think they used to call it smocks, is that right? Some of the parents and grandparents might know. Anyway, this little boy was born about 73 years ago. And you may not guess, but that's me when I was a bit fatter and younger. And a lot of time has passed since then. And I just want to tell you a little brief summary of some parts of my life up till about the age where Pastor Morgan is at the moment, and some stories at the end about my time in the Pacific Islands. So let's move on. I won't spend too much time, but when I was a bit older, this is primary school, about 11, I remember going to camp, and we used to have there at camp time what we called real live missionaries who would come and tell us stories. Some of the older people may remember. I always used to think, well, what's the real dead one like? But it was a real live missionary. We used to have these missionaries come back from the islands and tell us these amazing stories of cannibals and people who, didn't know anything about Jesus and so forth. And I wondered then, what would it be like to be a missionary? So anyway, the years went on. I went through high school, and then I got to about 17 or something. I was there, I think. And just before, around there, I went to camp, and I felt I was called to become a pastor. So I finished school and waited a while, and then was ready to go across to Avondale to do my studies. Well, about that time, just about 2 weeks before I left, I met this beautiful young girl. She was just about 17, just on 17, maybe 16 and a half. And I took her to a church social one night, just before I left for Avondale, and I knew after that night I wanted to marry that girl. So I went off to college. And by the way, that's my wife there. She's quite famous, actually. She's in an encyclopedia. That's the World Book Encyclopedia. And that was a friend of the family who happened to take that picture, and it got into the encyclopedia. So there you are, world famous. And I went to college, and then after a while we came back, and I went home halfway through my college and stayed and worked, and then we got married during that year and went back to college. And some years later, she's still very beautiful there. And of course, we all age, and that's one of the problems of sin, isn't it? We all get old. And won't it be wonderful when we can go to heaven and we won't get old? We'll all be young and healthy and fit and never get tired. I long for that day. But in the meantime, life goes on. So college, I finished up graduating in our class there. You probably won't be able to recognise any of them. If you could see it in a big picture, you might. And then I graduated and went out into ministry. And I was in 4 years in pastoral work in Victoria, and that was me as a young evangelist. That picture actually was on my evangelistic brochure at the time when I ran my first evangelistic meetings. And then, here, you won't be able to recognise this probably, but can you see the little red marks at the back row of those people? It's very interesting. I only came across this yesterday. And the person on the left with the little red mark, that's Pastor Russell Stanley. Next to him is Pastor Adrian Fleming. And next to him is Pastor Townend, Bill Townend. And I'm over on almost to the edge of the right hand. So we have 4 pastors who are in that photo that are now members of our church. I thought that's just interesting, isn't it? Anyway, after 4 years in Victoria, I got a call to go to Papua New Guinea. And I'm not sure how clear it is on your screen, but if you see that red circle or red line, that's the area of what's called the New Ireland province, way out in the middle of nowhere almost, and we were called to go to Kavieng. That blue spot is supposed to be over to the left where it says Kavieng. And that area around there was my territory as a young pastor. I went out there when I was 27, I think it was, about the same age as Morgan, and began work there for 3 years. Now, during that time, we had 2 little children, by the way, when we arrived. That was the age of our 2 children. And unfortunately, like most missionaries, I had to go away as the pastor to travel around sometimes for 2 or 3 weeks. And we had no mobile phones. We did have a telephone, but it used to cost so much money to ring back to Australia, we couldn't. We had no internet, of course, and no emails. So when I went away, Joy didn't know what was happening. I couldn't contact her for several weeks. And she was left there, the only Australian family in the area. But there were plenty of local people, of course, who were very helpful. So that's the close nearby where we lived. There was this beach, no surf, but a beautiful beach. And that's when my children, probably in our second year there, when they were just a little bit older. We used to have to travel around, or I had to, on different means of transport. One was a rowboat like that, which I'm sitting in the back, and sometimes it was in a motor canoe, probably more so in a motor canoe mostly, and then sometimes in a canoe like that, which was just paddled. Those canoes were cut out of a big log, and I actually bought one at one stage. I had it actually made, which was about twice as big as that, and we used to use that to go around to the nearby islands. Sometimes I had to travel in small launches like that one, and sometimes in planes, mission planes or commercial planes, depending on how far we used to have to travel. And then often, and probably more often than not, I would be travelling in the mission boat, which is called the Kambubu 2. And I'd go there with a crew, and we would travel around for a couple of weeks to different islands, and we'd stop and run meetings and so forth. And some of the places were pretty much like swampy areas like this one. Other places, we'd come to a village like this one, and we'd get off the boat and we'd work during the day with them, and then at night time run some meetings. Some of the people especially the island of Musau, we'd go around, and there's about, I think 13 or 17 villages, was it, around the island. And one of them had an actual airstrip out the front of the church, between the church and the ocean. And I remember going there with Pastor Parmenter's father in this little mission plane, and we landed and we stopped right outside the church and on this grassy airstrip. And I remember standing up at the front, and I could look out to the back of the church, and there was a little plane waiting for us just out there. But we had lots of fun and good experiences, very inspiring. And while I was there, I happened to be ordained as a pastor. On the left is my uncle, Pastor Ray Stanley, and then on the other side is Pastor Lionel Smith, who was a union president, and Pastor Robert Granger. And I'll mention Pastor Robert Granger again in a moment. When we left Kavieng about 3 years later, this was the welcome or the farewell that the young ladies of the local church gave to Joy and the children and myself. I guess I took the photo. So now I just want to tell you a story to finish off with. And right up there in that top part where the red line is around, you probably won't be able to see it, but there's a little red dot up the top, right out in the middle of nowhere. And I had to go there once to this little island. And Pastor Granger was with me too. He happened to be my boss. He was the mission president. So we hopped in our boat, that one there. It was a smaller one than the one we normally had. It was actually made by the local people in the area. And as we went out, we got into a storm. It was about a 4-hour trip across to this little island. It was so small that you could walk around it in about 20 minutes. at the most. It had about 100 people on. They were all Seventh-day Adventists, and they became Adventists years before when a man from another island about 5 hours away rowed or paddled his canoe all the way out there and took the message of Jesus to them. But on the way out, it became so rough. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like getting airsick or seasick. But I'm very bad at getting seasick. And it was so rough in this little boat, and it seemed to be taking forever, and I was just getting sicker and sicker, and I couldn't stand up on the deck to get the fresh air. I just had to go inside. There's one little hard bed that you could lie down on, and I tried that. And I became so sick, and my mind was just gone crazy almost. I wanted to jump over, just get off the ship and jump over. That's how bad it was. And I was almost going to do it. I thought, it'd be better to be in the ocean just swimming where it's not so up and down. Anyway, fortunately, Pastor Granger, who was also with me, he didn't get seasick at all. He loved it. And he thought it was great, jumping around in this boat. And he was so fortunate. But he came down and he could see how sick I was. And he prayed for me and he comforted me and encouraged me. And eventually we got through it. And as I was thinking that story, it reminded me of how we all need someone as a good friend. Do you remember last week when Pastor Carol told that story about the invisible friend and how Jesus is always there with us? I felt that Pastor Granger was a bit like that at that time. He was able to encourage me and help me. We all need good friends, and we all need to remember that Jesus is our best friend. He'll never leave us, as we heard last week. He'll always be with us, and I just hope you'll remember that. I hope too, as young people too, you might think about your future. What are you going to do if Jesus doesn't come before you're grown up? Do you want to plan to serve Jesus in some way? Doesn't have to be a pastor or a missionary. We can all be kind of missionaries here, whether you're a doctor or a carpenter or a pastor or a teacher or whatever. We can all determine to serve Jesus, to share our faith with people, to love people, be kind to them, and let them see Jesus shine out through us. Okay? Hope you'll do that this week. Thank you for listening. Bye.